Welcome to Real Herbalism Radio from River Road Studios in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is brought to you by the Herbal Nerd Society.
The Herbal Nerd Society is a collection of really awesome, cool people.
Really? You always say that.
I always say
you say that.
Awesome and cool.
It's so funny. You say that every time.
Because they are. They're really cool people.
Yes,
I
we
love the
appreciate
Herbal
them.
Nerd Society.
I appreciate them because they keep us on our toes and they make me a better web person. I get that all the time. So,
They make me smile.
you know,
They
and they
make
help
me
us.
smile.
They support this, which in turn supports us to do this. So
Yep.
Yeah.
it's a nice
It's
give and take.
it's our little exclusive club that we have that is $4.99 a month,
Mm-hmm.
and you get exclusive articles. People have said several times, "Well, I tried to read your article, but it said I had to be a member." Like that one did, yeah.
Yeah.
So you might want to become a member, sweetheart, because clearly you know what you're missing here, don't you?
Yeah.
So, but that helps us pay our bills, and it's a really cheap way to get an herbal education. I can tell you that. You ain't gonna get that somewhere else.
Too right.
Yep.
Too right.
All right. And Hunter Creation, graphic design and website designers, putting your marketing ideas to life, whether that's business cards or brochures or a rockin' new website. They can help you out. Contact them at huntercreation.com. Get healthy now with Candace.
Get Healthy Now with Candace is my clinical herbal practice. I work with folks near and far. I can do distance consults using Zoom
Meetings.
Zoom meetings. And if you're looking for help and inspiration and would like to get healthy, give me a call.
Right on.
All right. Occupy Medical.
Occupy Medical is an integrated health free clinic right here in Lane County, Oregon. We are a 501c3, and we are located at 1717 Centennial Suites 4 and 7. And you can donate to us any time because we are we'll give you a tax receipt, and check us out at occupy-medical.org.
Ace High Heat Graphics, custom and printed t-shirts or hats, any kind of apparel. You want to put your logo or message on something for your group or organization, they can help you out. Contact them at acehighheatgraphics.com. And Sierra Lupe Herbal
Consulting is my own little herbal thing. And I also do distance and in-tone consulting. And my specialty is on chronic illnesses. And I work with medication. And it's just kind of fun to do. So that's what I do. There you have it. So how do you get a hold of me? You go Sierra Lupe Herbal Consulting at gmail.com.
All right. Don't forget that we're on the social networks. We're on Facebook. We are on Instagram.
Yes,
We at the
are.
hashtag The Back to Herbalist. Plus, we already have an Instagram page as well.
Yep.
I believe we are on the Twitter.
We are
on the Twitter.
We are the
Yes.
Twitterist.
We're
Yes,
on
we are.
Twitter as well. So if you want to reach out to us, we are there and we will join in conversations. I know, Sue, you're really active on Facebook.
Mhm.
If you like the podcast and have been a long-time listener or first-time listener and really like it, nothing helps us out better than a review.
Yes, please send us a review.
We would love to hear more. All right, with all that, it's time for the show. It's show 173, the Herb Lab episode. We're going to rehash and re-talk about licensure with Nicole Telkes from last week's podcast. And it was a pretty contentious discussion, actually. I thought that, I think, Sue, you were surprised that Nicole was not a proponent of it, and Candace was, hey, I got another one. So it was just, so it was kind of interesting to hear and all the different opinions about licensure and some of the feedback that we've even received in email. So without further ado, here are your hosts, Candace Hunter and Sue Sierra Lupe.
I'm Candace Hunter.
And I'm Sue Sierra Lupe. And
welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
Whoa, here we go. 173.
Yeah.
I know, it's like
Herbalism.
oil and water with you two.
Really?
I don't know if it was oil and water, but we definitely have different approaches, and that's
He called
okay.
us oily water.
No, oil
Yeah.
and
Gross.
water, not oily and
Gross.
water.
Kind of gross.
Well, I thought it was interesting because I think, Candace, you had an predisposed
Sour
notion.
like vinegar.
Predisposed notion that Nicole would be pro licensure. and then she wasn't. And I think, Sue, it seemed like you thought she would be, and then she wasn't.
Yep.
So I watched both your facial expressions.
Blink.
You're like, what?
Yeah. Well, I mean, truthfully, Sue, you and Nicole are better friends. I'm not part of that relationship or part of that crowd or group. So I just made this assumption that
all my friends are the same.
Well, no, because you guys hang out and you both have similar opinions about quite a few things.
Right, sure.
That this would be just another one. And I was walking into thinking, oh, great.
They're going to gang up on me.
I have a hard time articulating my gut feelings on things. And
most
everything is gut feeling for me. So, so I was like, I have a hard time. Patrick gets angry at me because I have gut feelings, and I go with them, and he's like, you don't back them up with fact. I'm like, no, I don't. A lot of times I just roll with it because my gut's usually right. Like, there haven't been any times I can say in my lifetime where when I've had that gut feeling that it's been wrong. It's always played out to be right.
You better be knocking on some wood.
I don't need to, because I know it's right. I just follow it. But I also don't necessarily get a lot of people on my side because they're like, I'm not following your old gut. I'm like, well, it may be stinky at times, but it works for me.
Well, Candace, stinky guts hunter.
She doesn't have a lot of science backing her, but it turns out, 10 years, and it's always like 10 years later, we're like, oh, come to find out. Candace's gut was pointing in the correct direction, the safe direction, the one we didn't go in and we wish we had.
Oh, boy. We shall see. We'll see. I feel like the discussion was a hefty one.
It is.
And I enjoyed hearing the other perspectives.
Yeah.
Because I'm so entrenched in a licensure game, as it were, with working with the clinic. And for listeners that don't know, I work at a free clinic with doctors and nurses as an herbalist. And I'm also the clinic manager. So I have to be in both fields, and because I've been doing it since 2011, this kind of operation, then it just feels natural to me. It doesn't feel bizarre, but I know for realsies that it's a weird thing. There aren't very many people doing what I do in the United States.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's just like, well, this is just what's going to happen. This is our destiny.
Right.
Look at all these people that were healed.
Yeah.
Because we worked with a doctor, a nurse, EMT, the holistic perspective, herbalism, nutrition, everything. We gave every type of healing options to folks, and of course it helped.
Yeah.
So that's just the way things should be in my brain.
Right.
So yeah, that's a weird thought, and it's scary. Anytime you're changing a system, my gosh, there's always that terror that if you change one part of it, then you're going to lose some of the real basic things that are helpful.
Right.
And I understand that. I don't like change. I hate change. I'm really good at just stay the course, steady your horses, just keep on going.
We've noticed that about you.
Yep.
Yeah. No.
Yep. Just keep doing the same thing. If it's doing good, that's fantastic. But I just see so many people get hurt with the systems that we have now.
Yeah.
I don't think we got the option anymore.
No,
how
we need to change the system. The question is just, how do we change it?
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of doctors who don't get to practice the way they want to because of the system that we have now.
Yes, they're heartbroken.
And I think that on the non-licensure side, it's people saying, we don't want to end up in that boat. We don't want to lose the parts of our practice that are most soulful and dear to us. We've already seen what capitalism and medicine for profit does, and that's that we don't want to integrate with that system.
That's right.
We want to change that system so it can integrate with us.
Capitalism and medicine does not mix.
Yeah.
Just like capitalism and justice does not mix. You
Right.
should not have all the justice you can afford,
Right.
or all the health you can afford.
Right.
It's just a human right.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's really the crux of it, is it's the concern over not so much that we don't want high standards. It's, well, when you start getting regulations involved, then you're also starting to talk about capitalism and money, and money gets to make the decision. And
Right.
that's not going to create health. It hasn't yet.
Yeah.
So why do we think it's going to do it somehow in the magical future?
Right.
You know?
Yeah. So it sounds like
So-
we're talking about a way of changing things that's much deeper than just adding a license
Yeah.
option for folks.
Yeah, and I think the license is the surface detail, but it really is symbolic of something much, much bigger.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's why it's such a contentious topic in our field.
Yep. Yeah, we did have a person that sent us it's not an email, it's a message.
Well, we also got it through the Herbal 101
Okay.
question. I just forgot to print that out.
Okay.
So, but yeah, from Kylie Putnam
Yeah.
from Canada.
Yeah.
We got it from the interwebs.
The interwebs. Yeah.
Yes.
So, can you talk about, while I'm looking for that email right now, would you talk about your definition of what clinical herbalism looks like?
Yeah, that's a separate topic that isn't related necessarily to Kylie's comments, but I think that one of the things that is part of the discussion of licensure and the way our field is evolving is the question of what is a clinical herbalist. And I think we have many different definitions currently.
Very true.
And I think it ranges everything from, some people think that because you recommended a plant to someone, that makes you a clinical herbalist. And I think that's not really accurate anymore. I mean, there may have been a time when that still, 20, 30 years ago, when herbalism was in its serious infancy, maybe that actually really was. Some of our herbal people are greats, famous herbalists now, like Margie Flint or Jim McDonald or Thomas Easley, may have started off that simply. Rosemary Gladstar, many of them probably did a very long time ago, but that was before people knew what the word herb meant.
Yeah.
I remember being a child and we didn't know what the word herb meant. It was a foreign word to us, and my mom got a book and, explored this idea and planted a little herb garden. And the plants were gorgeous and lovely, and we didn't really use them. Well, but they were there and they were pretty.
20 years ago, when I was studying to get into the herbal field, the term that people threw around was medical herbalism. And that was juxtaposed with traditional herbalism. So it was just the idea was that there are herbalists that their pursuit is more chemistry and anatomy based rather than the humors or the elements or a spiritual practice. That they may have their own spiritual practice on themselves, but that's not, they don't incorporate that except as a baseline for healing.
Right.
And that was, of course, I was all over that one.
Right. So yeah, folks like David Hoffman would have been a medical herbalist.
Yeah, Stansberry, Dr. Jen Stansberry, and Tori Hudson, Dr. Yeah.
Is it David Hoffman? David Winston.
There's
I can see
David Hoffman is one of the people that I would say influenced me in what is now clinical herbalism. I tore through his books.
Yeah, I think it was one of his books. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of. But Winston's another name that probably comes up with regard to that too, I would bet.
David Winston. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are some amazing herbalists out there that just they really, I'm writing down, for those in the audience, I'm writing down all of these names to later put into the show notes. But I'm looking at them and I feel like I'm in so much debt to all of these people for teaching me different ways of healing other folks.
Right.
Because of course it's such an honor to be able to be in that position, and you don't want to take an honor for granted.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really, really humbled by that. yeah, it's just a different way of doing it. And some people are more open with their own spirituality than I am. I don't like talking about it in public.
Right.
Not that I'm ashamed. I just feel like,
Yeah.
ugh, that's under the turtle shell.
Yeah. I don't normally get asked about it.
Yeah.
I'm not against talking about it, but
Mhm.
people don't ask. And I figure, don't ask, don't tell. It's a proper culture with regard to that.
Right.
I don't want to hear about other people's spirituality sometimes.
Right.
And sometimes I get more of that than I like.
Yeah. That's a different podcast.
That is a very different one.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine, herbalist, named Rebecca from Palmer Ponds Botanicals out east. And I love her. She's got such a wonderful approach. And she said, the difference between, she told me, she's like, I'm relieved to be able to send people to clinical herbalists. She's a really great herbalist, but she doesn't practice clinical herbalism. And she does know exactly what it is to be in clinical practice. She's a therapist. So she's got that as a clinical practice, but she's like, no, I can send people to she sends people to like Margie, for instance, when they want to talk to a clinical herbalist. And she said her definition, just the very simplistic version of it is, do you have an intake form? If you have an intake form that you're using, in essence, I read that as you're keeping paperwork,
right?
Then that is the beginning of a clinical practice right there. When someone pops into your shop or stops by your house and says, hey, I've got these symptoms and what do you recommend? And you say, oh, well, maybe we try this here, here's a bag of herbs, and sends you off. That's not really clinical herbalism. That might be a community herbalism, and that might be sharing herbalism of some sort.
A village herbalist is another word I've heard thrown around a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good, and there's an important place for folks who do that. There's nothing wrong with that. There are people that would prefer to have a quick consult. They don't really want paperwork. They don't care, and they aren't going to necessarily.
They just have a cough.
Yeah, they have whatever their issue is. They have insomnia, whatever. You spend 10 or 15 minutes talking with them, and you can narrow down to a likelihood of which herbs are most likely to be helpful to them, and
you don't see them again.
Yeah,
send them on their care style.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And they may never, you may never see them again. There may be no follow up, or they might show up a year later and say, oh yeah, I went to the big herbal retailer online and just kept making that formula you made for me. It was great, thanks. And now I've got this wart. You help me out with that.
Yeah.
So, but you didn't need to keep a formula for it. You're not really keeping data on it, and you don't need to write a case study, and you're not going to be talking to your colleagues about them. So it's not really a clinical practice, but that doesn't mean it's a less than practice.
Right. It's just smaller,
it's
and
different.
You have a much better memory than I do.
Yeah. Well,
we've seen like 9,000 patients at Occupy Medical. I cannot possibly remember all of those people. I'm sure there's a person out there that would be
but
great
there's
at
a certain amount of
all.
paperwork that you have on each one of
yes,
those.
Absolutely. So when they come through the door, I've got the clipboard and paper right on there, and I can see what their blood pressure is, their vitals, some of the history.
Yes, and it probably also includes things like consent forms.
Of course, yes, you
which
bet.
The
HIPAA,
clinical herbalist, even though
not at all.
We are not currently governed by HIPAA, you should have consent forms in that style. And as a clinical herbalist myself, I treat my consults as being, sacred. I don't speak of what goes on in consult, even if it's someone I'm good friends with or I hang out with.
Yeah.
What we talk about within the consult stays there.
You treat that space as a sacred space.
Yes, just as a doctor should.
Yeah.
Just as a doctor should. I treat it with the same care and respect. If my client wants to go off and tell the whole world what we talked about, hey, that's his or her baggage. They can do it. That's part of the contract. Yeah, that's part of the contract, So that comes with clinical practice. But if you stopped in the herb shop and the village herbalist gave you your bag of herbs, there's no reason why he or she may not also potentially talk with someone else about, hey, I gave so-and-so this bag of herbs last week. Did you see them? Do you know if they're doing okay?
Right.
it's not the same.
Yeah.
You know, the confidentiality isn't inherent in that.
Yeah. And I know that kind of confidentiality issue in clinical herbalism that I feel very comfortable in. It has influenced the way I socialize. Like when I'm in the grocery store, I wait until someone that I recognize says hello to me. That way I'm not, because, you know, I'm 55 years old and this brain, like, I know that person. I know what their deal is. Do I know them from clinic? Do I know them from?
Where do I know them from? Crap.
Yeah. So just if someone nods to
Yes.
me, then
Yeah.
if I'm recognizing someone as a patient,
Yeah.
that's, I personally feel like that's violating that space outside of the clinic space. So I'm very cautious. And like, if you see Sue, say hello and say, I know you from blah, blah, blah.
It's interesting because I can honestly say I do not recall ever running into any doctors, nurses, or medical field people that I've seen as a patient or my family has seen as a patient outside of the clinic. I mean, I'm sure they go to the same grocery stores. It's a small town.
Yeah.
But I've just never happened to have run into any of them in that way.
Yeah.
So I have no actual personal experience with how a doctor or a nurse might handle such a thing.
Yeah, it's pretty tricky.
Yeah.
I've been doing what I'm doing for so long. I'm driving down and I see someone who was a patient and I'm like, oh, I wonder how his gallbladder is. You know, or like, I can't remember
but
his
you
name
can't ask
or
that
anything,
question. Yeah,
of course not. But I
no.
like think, oh, that limp looks like it's getting a little better. You know, and I've got a car full of people not saying, but my little brain is clickety click, 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 click.
Right, right.
So as a general rule, I will always nod to people as I'm going by them, and just because whatever, it makes it, everyone gets a nod, everyone gets a smile.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna say anybody's name or do any more than standard recognition of another body coming by. I don't want to violate that. And that's one of the curses of that kind of practice, the clinical herbalism practices. There tends to be this bit of a wall there, you know, but it's honoring what's sacred, like we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, I found that.
Oh, yes. Let's see. So what did Kylie have to say, to share?
And and thank you people that write in on our Facebook page as well as the emails.
Yeah, she wrote the same, thankfully, she wrote the same note in both places, which is really good.
Yes.
Really, really thankful. Yeah.
So the piece I have in front of me says, great discussion on the podcast this week. And that was the one between Nicole and Candace and myself about licensure we just talked about.
Show 172.
172, thank you. I'm still on team licensure. Going back to my letter last fall about being a massage therapist in Canada, therapists start with 2,000 hours. 2,000. They start out the gate with well over twice the education of U.S. therapists and integrate much more easily in the medical field. I just don't understand fighting basic standards. I work in a medical building. I have doctors as clients. I wish I had a degree, not a vocational certificate. I have a law degree, master's in finance, a bachelor's, but there is no degree option for massage therapists, and our credibility will always be suspect. So I am still fully on the side of dramatically raising the bar and truly integrating manual and herbal therapies into Western medicine. Great discussion. Well, thank you for that piece. And that, you know, what she brings up in that is that there, of course, several things, but one is that different countries work differently. Herbalists differently.
Yeah.
And
and the Canadian medical system is very different from the U.S. medical system.
They have healthcare for all. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is another thing we really, really need to change. We need to have that too, obviously.
Yes.
But having all of those hours of practice and of education, and then you have a certificate that isn't always honored, that has got to be frustrating.
That would be very frustrating here. I know that. I mean, you know, yeah. I can see where that would be frustrating. And it is quite possible that within their system, within the system she's working in, that the diversity of practice is much more, it's more likely to be respected, or there is more diversity in practice potentially.
Right.
I don't can't pretend to know much about the Canadian healthcare system.
Yeah.
I know that one of the problems that I fear will happen for herbalists or as part of the herbal field in America if we really try to integrate wholeheartedly into the current medical model we have, is that we will lose our diversity.
Right.
As doctors have lost a lot of their diversity of practice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's one of the challenges that, health insurance has brought to the table for them, because insurance will only pay for this or that. And,
right.
And then, you can speak to the lack of diversity there.
Sure. Being a specialist, which is what herbalists are, for us as specialists to work with a doctor, I in my head think about it the same way when they started putting dietitians into hospitals and nutritionists into hospitals, what a big swing that was. Yeah. And I also am old enough that I recall when nurse practitioners were quote unquote invented in our system. I think it was the 70s, 72 maybe. And there were a lot of doctors that said, well, if we have nurse practitioners, they're going to kill people and and it's a threat to us as doctors. And, what actually happened was then they discovered that people were getting better care because you don't need a doctor for every single condition. The nurse practitioners in our office, when there's something beyond their scope, then they say, oh, I need you to talk to the doctor for that. And then just bring over the doctor. Yeah. It's fabulous. They can write prescriptions for lots of things, but they do have a certain limit. Right. And it's better care.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess what I was referring to when I was talking about diversity was that some doctors would prefer to spend an hour talking to their patient.
Oh, yes. Especially for geriatrics.
Some doctors would like to go to the patient's house or see them in a non-medical building setting. Yeah. There's diversity. Some doctors would like to really actually integrate their own research and knowledge of plant or nutritional or other therapies as a part of their practice. Yep. They can't do any of those things, partly because it's not profitable, because the amount of fees and license, all the fees and the expenses of practicing medicine for them in this country are phenomenal. So it puts them in a position of not being able to keep up with, they can't charge enough to do an hour-long consult. They can't charge enough to cover all their expenses. It's not profitable. Yeah. Like it's not even break even. It's they have to pay the system to be allowed to practice medicine. Yeah. And that's not, so the diversity of practice has been really reduced and to some extent eliminated.
I know there's a lot of doctors that feel like they went through college and got all of that education. They're just a prescription bending machine. Right. That's all they're doing. And for a friend of mine who's a doctor, his specialty is geriatrics. He stopped working in the hospital he was working in here in town because he was given 15 minutes per patient, and they're geriatric. It takes half of that is just getting a blood pressure and talking to people about what that means. He felt like he was practicing irresponsible medicine because of that relationship that their administration had with the insurance companies. Right. And it was toxic. Right. So he moved on to doing a different type of care. Thank goodness. I have a lot of respect for him, obviously, and none of us want to be in that spot. So,
well, there are many doctors and nurses who completely have left the field or who practice in a very alternative way and may not accept insurance because insurance itself is a problem.
Yes, it really is. Yeah. It's supposed to be the leveling field, and so that everyone's on the same level. And what it's turned into is the leveling field, so we're all leveled.
Well, and it's only leveled for certain individuals. Right. I mean, even with the Affordable Care Act in America, we have not necessarily made it so that everybody gets equal treatment.
That's for sure.
In the doctor's office.
That's for sure.
It really isn't working.
Yeah. There are so many times I think, what am I doing here in America? I should be up in Canada or just, you name it, somewhere where there is equal access.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's grisly.
Yeah, so I think that's the heart of the licensure question. It isn't really about whether we as herbalists should accept lower standards. We shouldn't accept lower standards.
Absolutely
There
not.
should be a lot of basic standards there. What those are exactly is right now, I think, murky, and I think
Right.
In my opinion, it comes back to we need established, well-respected schools.
Yes.
And we've
absolutely.
got the beginnings of those, but we really they need a lot of support to build into, so we can rebuild or have the types of more good schools that we once had 100 years ago.
Earlier this year, or in 2018, we were talking, Candace, you and I were talking about some people in the herbal field that were not practicing wisely, that were being very disrespectful and were embarrassing the herbal schools and the kinds of things that we strongly believe in. Standards were very compromised. With a licensure or schools or some kind of accreditation of some kind, there would be something that people would have to answer to.
Right.
Anyone, and there's all kinds of different ways of handling that. But right now we don't have anything.
No, we don't have anything yet.
We have Facebook shaming.
Right. It's really sad.
We need something more. I mean, at least we got that, but that's not
acceptable.
That's
either.
torches and pitchforks. It's not always fact based.
Right. And what is being shamed now, you look back even as little as 5 or 10 years ago, that was cutting edge, and it just hasn't. Our field is growing so quickly.
It really is.
You can't say, you can't tell a 5-year-old, here, you should be reading this Harry Potter book. But in 2 years, that 5-year-old will be able to, potentially, read the first, you know what I mean? And that's where we're at as a practice, is we're growing rapidly, which is good to see. It's also a little scary because we don't have the structures in place to support the growth in a way that we know is safe. But then again, growing up isn't safe.
Breathing the air isn't safe.
Right?
Drinking the water if you're from Flint isn't safe.
Yes.
But because it's scary doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
Right.
Another thing that Candace and I were talking before the show a little bit about hierarchy. And, and how neither Candace or I, any listener already knows that neither of us are interested in hierarchy.
But you want to explain for the listeners what you were meaning, because when you first said hierarchy, I was like, "What are you talking about? I'm an older herbalist than you," and I know that's not what you meant. So
I may not be using a really good term for that, but what I have noticed several times, and it's on both on the traditional herbalist side and on the clinical herbalist side, the notion that one person, if they follow a certain structure, is a better herbalist than another person.
Right.
And that's really, I really bristle when I hear that kind of thing. And it's not just because people have put me down saying you're not following a traditional path, therefore you're not an actual herbalist. I mean, that's happened several times, but it's not just because of my personal reflection of it. I just don't think it's fair, and I don't think it's accurate.
No, it's not. It's not, because you can end up with someone who might be really interested in science and chemicals, phytochemicals, and microbiology and all of that. And they're listening to the potential client saying, "Oh, these are my symptoms. This is what's going on." And that person might say, "Here's a formula." And they've got a ton of science behind why these herbs should potentially or could work.
Right.
And you can have a different herbalist hear the exact same thing, sit there, and that herbalist might be someone who has practiced Ayurvedic and energy-based herbalism, and that's they're steeped in that, and they've got the same number of years of experience, the same amount of clinical hours, the same number of hours of study under tutor or under experts, more advanced herbalists and that sort of thing, and they're going to say, "Okay, here's a formula, and I've got all this evidence that it should work as well." It's just as evidence-based. It just isn't evidence framed in a clinical study, but it's still evidence and it's real. They're both giving evidence-based formulas. They might even be the same formulas.
That's what I was thinking.
They probably won't be, because any two herbalists, you can have two herbalists who have the twins,
right?
Who went through all the same systems and everything. They'll still come up with different plants.
Yep.
And that's fine. And either of those two formulas may work really well. And in fact, half of one formula mixed with half of the other formula might be the golden
Even
ticket
better,
for
yeah.
that client.
Yeah.
Because every person is different. Every situation's different. It's all different.
Yeah. We're blessed with such a great diversity here in America. My visitors to my clinic come from just a huge
All
spectrum.
over the place, yeah.
You know, not just a lot of people are like, oh, it's a homeless clinic. And there are a lot of people, about 50% of the folks that come to our clinic, they are
That's
unhoused.
Only 50%.
Right. And it's a free clinic. So that's
yeah.
naturally, and there's a lot of people that they're working a couple of jobs and barely able to keep food on the table. And for whatever reason, they're housed. They're right in that crack. And then we have people that come through that are doctors and nurses. They come through and they'll volunteer and say, hey, Sue, 15 minutes after work, can you spend some time with me? Like, absolutely, my friend.
Right.
That they've got a much higher income and
it's
we
a
serve
free
everyone
clinic,
the same
and
way.
you don't have to fill out forms on your income to find it to get treatment. You just serve.
You
first
get,
come, first serve
right.
at your clinic.
And of course, paperwork RS. We just love it. But but there's lots of times when I've been running around under bridges giving out my little emergency bags, and I was like, oh, dude.
Right, but I guess
this and here's that.
My point
no
was that at Occupy Medical, it's not about your income.
Right,
your income's irrelevant, and you don't necessarily have to say how much money you do or don't make. You just walk in the door and say, I need help.
I need help, and you deserve care. And that's the deal.
Exactly.
And that kind of piece, I think, that belongs in everybody's practice. And it's the way that you do things, as long as they are respectful, they are consistent. You're not showing prejudice from, I will only treat women, not men, for urgent care situations or whatever. I'm not thinking of a good example, but I will only treat this type of person because they belong to a certain class, or, that hierarchical thing for patients as well as for working with folks. I feel like that it's balderdash. You've just got to give care because care is needed.
Yeah.
And you do it to the best of your ability.
Right.
And I'm too damn shallow to really do the kind of stuff that you do, Candace.
Right.
So you do your scope and I do my scope, and please let me learn something along the way.
Right.
That would be great.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things that comes up, that hierarchy question comes up partly because some herbalists may feel threatened by different types of practice.
Yep.
I do know that when I hear people who are science-based herbalists talk about how theirs is evidence-based, I really bristle, because I'm like, Tibetan herbalism's been around a lot longer than your scientific study. And, it's suggesting these herbs, some of which may or may not have been studied, but they work.
Yeah.
Because there's ample evidence that they work. So it makes me angry. But at the same time, it doesn't mean the science-based formulas are bad. They're really good too.
Sure.
And I'm not against having scientific studies saying, hey, this is how Siberian ginseng appears to be working as an adaptogen in the system. Like, all right, great.
Yeah.
Now I've got more language to talk to my clients.
Yeah, it's a developing field. It's so, oh man, it feels so great for me when I read another study, I'm like, yes, I read a study and I think about this one herb that they were talking about, and then I think, wait, this herb is related to it. So would that mean, and then, brain explosion on my part. And
exactly. So I think people start to feel threatened when their style of herbalism is not the one that's being being upheld as being the one.
Yeah.
There's so many styles.
There really are.
I mean, there really are so many styles, and many of them are very good.
Yep.
There are many ways of teaching herbalism and learning. And just because some of them work better for me or for you or for the other guy doesn't make any of those right or wrong. If the teaching works and the student's getting the lessons, and then the student can go away and apply the lessons in real life, then it was the best way. It was a good path.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. We need it all. All right. Well, we want to give a special thank you to Nicole Telkes for talking with us on show 172, that wonderful interview that she bestowed upon us. And we also want to thank Kylie Putnam for putting her her notes in there and doing it in 2 different places, both the email and on Facebook, so that we paid special attention to that. And thanks for sharing her perspective and stirring this podcast into action. I'll tell you what.
Yes, and we also want to remind folks that we just had National Fire Cider Making Day. The Fire Cider campaign, or Free Fire Cider, has published the trial date is coming up in March, and now is a really great time to send some donations their way if you can.
If that's your Jiminy Jam, then that's one way of doing it.
Yep.
So but until then,
put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.